From New Hampshire Public Radio and the Howe Library in Hanover, New Hampshire, you're listening to Check This Out, a new literary series where we dive deeply into the works of emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. I'm your host, Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novel Atomic Anna. I am thrilled to be able to share these conversations with you over the next few weeks. Later in the series, we'll be hearing from Jennifer Croft. She is the author of the new novel, The Extinction of Irina Ray. But today on the show, my guest is Inci Atrek. She is the author of the brand new novel, Holiday Country. This is her debut, set on a gorgeous Turkish coast. It's a love story between a mother, Meltem, and her daughter, Ada. The two split their life into two parts of every year, spending summers returning to Meltem's homeland, Turkey, where they vacation on a small sun-soaked beach town, and winters in California, where Ada was born and they live with her father. Because of this split, Ada feels she's not quite Turkish or American. Her connection to both is as fleeting as the seasons. Set almost entirely in Turkey over the course of one summer and brimming with lush descriptions that made me feel like I could taste the salt water and bask in the sun on the Aegean coast, this is a coming-of-age novel that explores the connection between mothers and daughters. The novel explores how decisions affect entire generations and how no matter how hard Ada may try to be American or Turkish, something is always lost in translation. Inci, welcome to Check This Out. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Rachel, so much for having me.
Since I put this book down, I just have had this very long list of questions, but mainly I just wanted to talk to you about the fact that I felt like I was in Turkey, that I was in the water, that I was on the beach as I read this novel, and the small town where Ada lives just felt real. You know, like I was walking through the paths with the hidden mulberry bushes with her. What is your connection to Turkey? How do you know it so well? Tell us about that.
So I grew up in California with Turkish parents. Both my mom and my dad are Turkish. And every summer I went with my mom and my brother as well to my grandmother's house on the Aegean. So it takes place in the place where I spent my summers. And right now I live in Istanbul, where I've been living since 2019.
So that is how you knew it so well. I mean, I felt like this was not just a tourist perspective on this small beach town, right? This was someone who had literally grown up and knew what the sand felt like, summer after summer on her skin.
Yeah, definitely. And I moved around a lot in the States. And so summers in Turkey were always a constant for me.
As they are for your character, too, in the book. I understand you went to college in America, and this book really grew out of a set of travel essays and short stories that you started writing in a college class, as some books do, but that over the years it really has evolved and, changed. So could you tell me a little bit about that evolution?
Of course. So when I was in college, I was an English major with a creative writing concentration, which meant that in addition to all the English major credits, I took creative writing workshops. And two of the workshops I took were short stories and travel essays. And I remember one of my travel essays was about idyllic, was about my summers there. And my short stories were always about mother-daughter relationships. So I had kind of this setting in this theme that I couldn't get out of my mind. After college, I worked on a short story about a girl summering in Istanbul. And I just absolutely knew this was the thing I needed to work on and get right and just get it out of my system. So after multiple evolutions, I also wrote a novel before this one, which was a mother-daughter novel taking place mostly in Istanbul that, I've shelved for now. And yeah, this is what it ended up in the end.
So can you just tell me a little bit more about that pull to write about Turkey?
Oh, I mean, my summers in Turkey were just the best time of my life. I mean, I don't go to that beach town so much anymore. I don't spend the full summers there. I spent 3 full months there every year. And it was so magical to be in this extremely tight knit community and just be out all the time. Where I felt like I had so much freedom there, and there were only a few places I could go, and it was very safe. And I was out all night with my friends, and it wasn't anything that I was able to do in my life in America, where if I had to go anywhere, I would need a car. I would need to ask my mom for a ride. I could never be out till like 3, 4 in the morning. And it was so exceptional for me. And it was It's very interesting to come back to America and try to tell my friends about what it was like because a lot of people hadn't been there and they didn't know too much about the country. So I felt just this, maybe not responsibility, but I really wanted people to understand how I felt when I was there because it was such a special feeling. Even just to be in a country where everyone knows how to pronounce your name correctly and you just feel this warmth of home. And so I think I spent a lot of time trying to describe to my friends what it's really like and how I really felt. And kind of getting that exactly right was very important to me.
That's so powerful what you just said, being in a place where everyone knows how to pronounce your name properly.
Yeah, I mean, the where I hear my name pronounced properly was mostly from my mom and dad, who are, the people who love me so much, and then all of a sudden you kind of start to feel that love everywhere just from the way they say your name.
So the character in the book, Ada, she's 19, and she really feels this same love. It's very, very clear in the book. But she also feels torn between the two places, between America and Turkey. She feels like she's not quite fully in either. So would you mind reading to us just a short paragraph so we can get a little bit of a sense of how Ada feels and set us up in the book?
So this is from the beginning of the book. Everyone knows where our house is, I call out after him. The sentence comes hurling out of me differently than I mean for it to, childish and petulant instead of powerful and indifferent. He turns to me, then shakes his head and chuckles. I shut my eyes and hate myself for how I always use the simple words. My American tongue cracks and guesses where it should flow and pop, and because I cannot properly place my inflections, I often leave conversations with the same questions I had upon arrival. We are at week 5 of my summer now, so I have managed to slip my accent out of the basic phrases, perfected the cadence of the hellos and the good evenings, and the orders of tea, toast, and coffee. When I keep things simple, no one can tell that I don't belong here. In the longer conversations, sounds mix and mangle in my throat on the way up, and my personality gets lost in the shuffle. I am not myself when I speak Turkish, though every summer I get just a little bit closer. In the summer, when the days are sticky and cannot separate from themselves, my linguistic progress becomes its own calendar. Aside from that, the only other way to tell time in this town is through the sun's demarcations on the skin.
Thanks so much for reading. This passage is so powerful because I think it really sets up this divide that Ada feels, your main character, right? This pull and how badly she wants to sound Turkish. And yet it takes her time, right? And she still feels childish in the language. Can you talk a little bit more about that feeling for her?
Yes, I it's this is one of my favorite topics is, learning languages and what happens to your personality when you start learning a language. I think one thing that I think about a lot is when you're learning a language. So in Ada's case, her speaking Turkish, when she makes a mistake, it's not necessarily, oh, I didn't know the right word for it. This person's going to misunderstand me. It's not really an error of misunderstanding that bothers her, but it's when you master language, you master the sense of power, and then you're also able to kind of create this hierarchy that you want. So, especially in Turkish, when you have a formal and informal way of speaking to someone, the words you choose, they can establish like a respectful distance, or they can immediately invite intimacy. And so knowing when and how to use the words and the language in that way is really like kind of a path to power for her that she just can't grasp.
Is that something that you struggled with too growing up? Or is that from personal experience? Or how did you dig into that feeling?
Well, I also learned French when I was in school, so I struggled a lot with that when I went to study abroad in France. I think for Turkish, it's interesting because I grew up speaking Turkish maybe 95% of the time at home with my family. And one thing I realized when I moved to Istanbul is that I didn't have a problem at all saying what I wanted to say. Here and there'd be vocabulary that I didn't know. But in terms of communication, it was fine. The strange thing was that I was very used to speaking Turkish as someone's daughter. And it was from the position of being a daughter that was, very obedient, values kind of harmony over being right and getting what you need. And so when I was in situations where I maybe had to, negotiate something, or there was a contractor working in my house and they were maybe doing something wrong, and I needed to, the sense of self that I needed to establish, even though the words would come to me, the way I would communicate them, it just wouldn't align properly. And so that has been something that I've come to realize and I have been working through.
I mean, it's very powerful and very clear on the page. And it really just pulled me into your world here of this beautiful debut holiday country. If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum, and you're listening to Check This Out. My guest today is Inci Atrek, and we are on New Hampshire Public Radio. Inja, we're going to dig a little bit more into this idea of language and this space of being lost in between, which I am personally obsessed with. This idea of being caught between two worlds and two languages, because in the middle of it we have Ada's mother, Maltam, and I wanted you to tell us a little bit about that character.
Ada's mother, Maltam, grew up in Turkey, and then when she married an American, she moved to America and she's been living there. So the story is all told from her daughter Ada's perspective. So what we know about Maltam and what we think about Maltam, we know through kind of Ada's thoughts and how she sees her. And the way Ada sees her mother is someone who, kind of in a terrifying way, just has no home. She doesn't speak English that well. She doesn't have very many American friends. She makes mistakes on popular brand names. And then when she goes back to Turkey over the summers, that country has changed in Meltem's absence. So there's a lot going on in the country that Meltem doesn't know about, or that the language has changed, and she doesn't have a foothold there either. So when Ada looks at her mother, she thinks this is a woman who just doesn't have a home anymore and doesn't belong anywhere. And there's actually this scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in the book where Ada's mother in Turkey is eating fish, and the way she describes the fish in Turkish, Ada thinks these are such like childish, juvenile words to describe the fish. If she really had, if she hadn't left Turkey, if she'd lived there, she'd use much stronger descriptions. She'd, have mastery over the language once again. And so that is Ada's perspective of her mother.
What's fascinating me about our conversation right now is you're using these adjectives like stronger and passion, right, to describe the mother. I love that you're talking about using these adjectives, strength, to use language around just a meal, just the fish. And yet that's what she wants to see in her mother. So she's looking at her mother and she's seeing her fading, and the summer begins and she's thinking, what is happening to my mom? She sees her mom as someone who came to America and is sort of lost herself. And she wants her to be that strong woman, and she wants her to come back. So tell us a little bit more about what's going on there between the mother and daughter.
Yeah, I mean, the story is driven by Ada's. She has this sense of this inheritance of fate. So seeing her mother struggling with, language or places. Her mother talks about places in Istanbul that have long since been torn down and aren't around anymore. She sees kind of her future in her mother. Like, if I don't do something about where I belong and who I am, this is going to be the trap that I'm going to fall into as well.
And so into this web between mother, daughter, right? This sort of fading mother figure, maybe fading mother figure and daughter. There's anger there, but then enter this sort of strong, burly man one day on the beach. He comes on. Can you tell us about Levent?
So, in this small seaside town where everyone knows everyone, the summer when Ada is 19, she sees this man on the beach who knows her. Or he says, you must be Maltam's daughter. And as it turns out, he is a very integral person from Maltam's past. And he really represents Turkey for Ada. He's a guy who always knows what to do. He knows the ins and outs of the city, completely just like soaked in the culture and language. And she thinks that because her mother and father are kind of in a rocky area in their marriage right now, she wants to set her mother up with Levant. And she thinks this man can bring my mother back to Turkey. He can bring her to the life that she shouldn't have left behind. He can bring her back to the place where she can really blossom and be her full self. And that's where things get started.
So what I thought was so interesting about introducing Levant as this view into, the spark that her mother used to have was we also have another male character in the book that we don't see very often, and this would be Ada's boyfriend. He's American. He's not there at this moment in the beginning of the book, right? He's still in California. And she has a conversation with him a little bit later in the book when she's saying, I'm feeling like my mother is fading. But in fact, he says, are we talking about the same woman? And so, sort of reflected through these two male characters, we see an energy in Ada's mom that Ada doesn't see. And I wanted to talk about that, right? So why is it through the men that they see a spark in the mother that the daughter can't see?
Yeah, I mean, Ada has so many of her own fears that her view of the world is very colored by this idea of belonging and not belonging. So, for example, when she is so terrified of making a type of mistake and she sees someone else make it, her mother make it, a similar mistake, it just becomes very big for her. It becomes a very, overwhelming and drastic action. Whereas maybe for someone else, they would focus on Madtam's other qualities or the way that Madtam lives her life that isn't necessarily judging it by, oh, did she pronounce something correctly? Did she go down the right street in Palo Alto? Did she correctly remember the name of the cinema that's so famous?
Yeah, yeah. I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out on NHPR. My guest today is Inci Atrek, and we are talking about her brand new novel, Holiday Country. And right now, we are really digging into the family dynamics, the social dynamics of this mother daughter relationship. And there's also a grandmother who's on the beach with them, right? So it's three women sitting there, and we have Levant. So we have this sort of foursome in Turkey together. So introduce us to the grandmother, please.
The grandmother, Mukadder, is my favorite character. She is a woman who really values family. She is incredibly dominant and she loves to kind of sink her claws into other people's lives and control them a bit through her own manipulative ways.
Why is she your favorite character?
That's an interesting question. A lot of writing is, figuring out who characters are, making sure that the decisions that they make sense based on their personalities. And it's a lot of craft questions. But from time to time, a character comes up that you kind of see fully realized. And every time there's a scene with one of them, you think, oh, this is one of my favorite scenes because this character is in here. And I like her a lot because even though she is, very dominant, very controlling, you can kind of see that it comes from this sense of love. So she's not completely a villain, but she has these two sides with her that are very much at war.
And so one of her sides is, of course, trying to get her daughter, Maltem, back together with Levant, who was her childhood love. So Ada also sort of gets in on the action and tries to get them back together and be a matchmaker. But then she realizes that it's not going to happen. So tell me about. So Ada realizes they're not going to get back together.
Yes, Ada realizes that this isn't going to work out. And she starts to think about how her mom wasn't able to kind of keep this man around, even in her past. And she thinks, I'm not my mother. Like, what if I am able to do something my mother wasn't able to do? Then I can have the life that she wasn't able to have. And so she starts to kind of have this like romantic obsession with Levant and starts to pursue him. And it becomes just so meaningful for her. Kind of like, entice his attraction and capture it and keep it. And what that could mean for her that this Turkish man who grew up in Turkey and lived in Turkey sees her and sees something worthwhile and attractive in her, how much that would pave the road open for her way into belonging.
But of course, he was her mother's first boyfriend and first love. And so we get into this love triangle that it definitely made me uncomfortable. I definitely wasn't ready for that. I don't think we love to think about our parents' past sex lives. And yet here we are with a daughter who is, starting to have this romantic obsession with her mother's first boyfriend. So why did you come up with this sort of triangle, and what was it like writing that for you?
Why did I come up with this triangle? So I really thought when I first set out to write a novel, I really thought, what are some ways where people think that they really belong somewhere? The reason that answering this question was important for me was because I think when you have an opinion about a place, especially if you have a very strong emotion like love for a place, I found that people often don't take that love seriously unless you have a very strong connection to the place as well. So I thought, okay, if you love a place and you want to convince people that this love for the place is real, you really do have to have some connection or belonging there. I don't think this is true at all, but this is the way I was thinking about it. And so I thought, okay, how do people feel like they belong somewhere? Is it when they speak the language fluently? Is it when they work there full time? So they really understand that, rhythm and pace of the city. Is it when they are, politically active in the country? And I think the most interesting one that I came up with was, well, do you belong if someone who knows that place inside and out, truly steeped in the language and the culture of the place, falls in love with you? Or is attracted to you? And I thought, okay, I think this is the most exciting path down. And I really wanted it to be a story about a young woman who has this nostalgia for her mother's life that her mother wasn't able to live. And so I wanted this sense of, okay, my mother wasn't able to live the life that I think she should have lived, where she could have truly stepped into becoming her own person. How can I kind of reach back into the past and fix that for her? And so that's why I built the love triangle that I did.
But certainly, Ada could have had roots or that deep connection with someone who was her age also. So I'm wondering if you got any pushback from editors or agents or early readers on making her love obsession into her mother's first boyfriend.
I didn't get any comments on that at all, or the fact that it was uncomfortable. And even, I mean, as a person thinking about it in the real world, yes, that's an uncomfortable situation. But as a writer, I didn't for a second feel that feel uncomfortable myself writing it, because I understood exactly what Levant meant to Ada, and the fact that she would pursue that feeling of belonging that he just so fully seemed to embody, made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and I think that's why I also really appreciated his character and that love in the end also, because it really transported me to Turkey and to Ada's, desire to be a part of the country. And I saw that as you have described it, but at first it was that moment of jarring, and then, and then it was, no, Inji's taking me into this world and this is amazing. So I thought that was really well done. I want to talk about, you have the beauty of this love and the beauty of Turkey, but I also want to talk about the beauty of the prose, because attraction and love are sort of characterized by an urgency usually. And yet your prose is elegant and restrained in a way. It's like a slow summer day. I felt like reading this book, I was basking in the sun, but there's this urgency in Ada. And I wanted to ask you about how you thought about balancing those two as you were writing.
Thank you for saying that. I really wanted people, like, as they were reading, to feel that they were on summer vacation in a place where just time worked a little bit differently. There's kind of moments in the book where people kind of look at the moon or look at the sun and gauge what time it is, or what time it is to do something. And I didn't think so much about balancing kind of the urgency with creating this like very slow paced town, but because it is a story about a young woman nostalgic for her mother's past and kind of reaching back into the past and trying to fix that mistake, I really thought about kind of different things that I could do with time. Slow it down, make things seem to last forever, just to get readers into that headspace of time being a little bit more kind of fluid and easy to manipulate.
If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out on NHPR. My guest today is Inci Atrek. We're talking about her new novel, Holiday Country. And right now we're talking about the beautiful summer days, the feel of being on the beach and the ocean, which are reflected in the prose. And I also want to talk about one sort of big elephant in the room that we haven't touched on yet, which is in the middle of this beautiful, languid summer, Ada's father is missing. He's not there. We hear about him a few times, but he's just sort of in passing, right? He's physically not there with the rest of his family, and he doesn't come very often in the summers. So can you tell us a little bit about his character?
Yes, I mean there's not that much about the father character. I really wanted it to be a story just about these three generations of women and them kind of all in the same house and their relationships. But Ada right now in the book is very angry with her father because he has had an affair right before they left to Turkey for the summer. So that's something that kind of propels her to more easily think about setting up her mother with this man. And he is, he's from Michigan. American guy who met her mother on a backpacking trip in Paris.
So you mentioned that Ada was angry with her father because he was having an affair. Yes, but also you mentioned one of my favorite lines in the book. You also describe a different kind of anger that she has for him. And you have a sentence where you wrote, "How easily language can slip away after years abroad. Just one more thing my father has taken from her," being Ada's mother. That, he has taken her out of Turkey and she's lost her language, her fluency with her country in a sense. And she's angry at him for that too.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for bringing that up. So the reason that Ada's mother moved to the States is because, she got married to her father and she left for America. And he is the person in Ada's mind who created this woman who doesn't belong anywhere. He took her away from the place that where she was supposed to be herself and blossom and live and kind of cut that part of her life short.
And so when we're talking about, again, I love the adjectives that you're using because you're talking about cutting that part of her life short, right? And cutting things off. And yet Ada also seems to be cutting off connections herself. She has a group of friends that she hangs out with every summer. They're very close to her. And yet during this summer, she's pulling away from them. They were her rock, right? And throughout her life growing up every summer. And then I see this summer, she's keeping things from them. She's not telling them at first what's happening. Can you talk about that group of friends?
Yes, they are a group of four, and she loves them. It's two guys and a girl, and they are all family. Actually, the other three are twins and cousins, and so she thinks a lot about how when she goes back to America, they're going to kind of continue their friendship and then continue their relationship. And but whereas for her these are just her summer friends, it's very temporary, but the friendship is still quite strong. This is also a summer when they are starting, in college and internships are going to start, so it's really there's this kind of fear that it's going to be their last summer together and what's going to happen to this friendship when they don't have those 3 months by the sea.
Right. And so, as sort of a test of the friendship, I thought they have this swimming challenge that they issue to one another. Can they swim out, to this far off island? And swimming itself is a big theme. The ocean and Ada's ability to swim is a big part of the book. Can you tell us a little bit about that challenge that they issue?
Yeah, so there are a couple islands that they can see from the beach club where they go swimming. And they hear that one of the kids of the town swam to one of the islands, and they think, oh, we don't know if he's lying. Like, if he's able to do it, we'll be able to do it. And one of the friends says, like, no, you guys are crazy. You have no idea. Like, you've been coming to the seaside all your life. But look, we just, hop off the pier, we swim for a little bit. Those waters you don't know anything about. Like, you're going to be in over your head. And so Ada and another friend do attempt this swim. And what they're driven by, or what Ada is really driven by, is thinking, I want people to remember that I did something here. So again, this is another way for her to kind of attach herself to this place, to have done something incredible, and therefore kind of cement her belonging to this area.
And yet we find out later in the book that the island that she's trying to swim to is cursed.
Yes, yes. She doesn't know. She knows that there's a curse when she starts to swim toward it, but she doesn't know what it is.
Could you tell us about this curse? Because I'm wondering if the curse was a personification of the grandmother in some way.
Uh, that's interesting. No, I didn't think of it as a personification of the grandmother. I mean, I won't give away what the curse is because the reader finds out toward the end of the book. But it's something that is very relevant to the theme of inheritance of fate and mothers and daughters, and kind of looking back to your mother to kind of get hints as to the type of life you may or may not live, or the type of life that you may or may not feel trapped in, just being the next generation.
I want to go back to this idea that you brought up earlier that you wanted this novel to really be about three generations of women and, the inheritance and what they pass down from one generation to the other. What is it that they are passing down?
I think that what I was focused on is what Ada feels is being passed down. And so from her grandmother to her mother, she sees that her grandmother is very controlling. So the way that the grandmother raised the daughter is by making all these decisions for her. And so Madame, the mother, kind of grew up in Ada's eyes to be a woman who doesn't really have agency. She kind of drifts from place to place, kind of taken wherever life carries her. And that's what she became as a result of being this woman's daughter. And Ada, in turn, feels like from her mother, she got this sense of, not having a foothold anywhere, not belonging, having this split identity that she doesn't know what to do with. So those are the things that, from Ada's perspective, have been passed down.
So this idea of fitting in and passing down, right, this feeling of belonging is super clear theme throughout the book. And I thought it was so interesting that in their little beach house, they don't have a television. And television, you talk about how culture is passed down or passed around. Like one of the ways you fit in is by knowing what's on TV and who's a TV star, right? And knowing what people are saying on TV. And yet Ada's family doesn't even have that. So why did you choose to take that away? And what was the effect of that?
Oh, I wanted Ada to have another obstacle to feeling like she belonged to this country. So even though she comes to Turkey every summer, she comes to this tiny town where, nothing really happens. No news from the outside world seeps its way into the town. She doesn't read the newspaper, she doesn't watch TV. And it creates this it puts her in the strange state of, I come here, I live here every year for 3 months, and yet all I know is there's the beach club, there's the tennis courts, there's the market. And so just having this kind of exposure to the place over and over again for so long, you can still have just this entire kind of culture and politics and history about the country still be completely separate from you and your life.
There's a big shift in the novel when we go from the beach town towards the end, we move to Istanbul. And you take us into the city, and it's very different feel, very different scene. Can you talk about that shift and why you took us there?
Istanbul is very different from the tiny beach community that Ada spends her summers. And when she is in Istanbul, she can really see more clearly the life that her mother used to live. So she goes and she passes by the gates of her mother's old high school. And there's a scene where she's kind of taking all these different paths on the hot summer day to get to that high school to see if one of those paths was maybe the path that her mother took. And there's this sense also in Istanbul that this is kind of really the city that she has to conquer to really feel Turkish. Because just being in that beach town, I mean, there's really nothing to know there. You go there for 3 days, you know it inside and out. So I wanted Ada to feel like she was getting closer to the person she wanted to be, to feel this connection with the country when she goes there. But what ends up happening is she actually spends a lot of time in the tourist hotspots while she's there.
So I wanted to go back and talk a little bit about also the choice to, give us brief little snippets into Ada's life in America and how she interacts with the Turkish American community there. because in Turkey, she feels like she's not quite Turkish enough. And then when she's in America, she feels like the Turkish American community isn't Turkish enough for her, right? And we see these characters, throughout in little snippets. So can you talk about that dynamic?
Yeah, I loved writing about Ada's experience with the Turkish American community in California. So she kind of sees them as, I would say, a larger extension of her mother. So there's a scene where she's at the Republic Day Ball, which is the celebration the Turkish American community puts on to celebrate the founding of the Turkish Republic every October. So everyone's dressed up, they're dancing, they're having dinner, and she looks at them and she thinks, these people, they're celebrating a country that they decided not to live in anymore, and these people are just so separate from where they should be, and I just want to make sure I never end up like them. And so she sees that again the way she sees her mom, which is these people don't belong anywhere. I need to stay away.
Again, we're back to this theme of belonging and not quite fitting in and being lost in translation, which I'm obsessed with and which you have written beautifully. If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. My guest today is Inci Atrek, and you're listening to Check This Out on New Hampshire Public Radio. We're talking about the brand new novel, Holiday Country. Okay, Inja, I want to switch gears a little bit now and talk about the writing life, because there's so much about language in here and this idea of not fitting in, but also there's a true love for Turkey. And so when I put down this book, I was wondering what you wanted us readers to take away from your novel.
Well, I definitely wanted people to feel like they should come visit Turkey. So that was always on the agenda. I wanted people to know that if they have ever fallen in love with a place, so whether it's, I don't know, you go to Paris for 2 days, you feel this intense connection, you feel this love, you have a love for your hometown that you know, just for readers to know that that love is real and that love is valid. And I have such intense emotions about places that I've lived in or visited briefly. And I think a lot of times people are kind of afraid to call that love for what it is. I think that's one of the main messages that I really hope gets across in the book. And I also wanted people to see maybe a side of life in a country that they maybe don't know much about, and have that kind of start bringing up questions like, oh, what other countries can I read about that, maybe I don't know all the different types of ways that people could live there, or the different cities, or different parts of the culture. So it was really special for me to be able to share a story that takes place in Turkey, because I know that there aren't that many books, at least that I've come across in America, that show parts of the country.
So you mentioned that you grew up speaking Turkish at home. You went to Turkey every summer. You live in Istanbul right now. So I'm imagining that there are a lot of Turkish and English running through your head as you're writing this book. As you were writing, were you thinking in Turkish and then writing it in English, or what was in your head as you were writing this?
Oh, I was thinking in English. I think I was thinking about scenes in my life where I felt very strong emotions, whether they were positive or whether they were uncomfortable. And then how can I translate this emotion onto the page to a reader that doesn't have that sense of duality, those two lives that I constantly balance in my mind?
I love that. And, you talked in the beginning a little bit about how this started, this beautiful debut, Holiday Country, started as sort of travel essays and short stories that you were writing in college. And, you were feeling that duality. How did you decide to move all to fiction and not stay with nonfiction?
I mean, I loved writing travel essays. Whenever I go to the bookstore, I always go into like the travel section first. But I always had it in my mind that I would be a novelist since I was a kid. So it wasn't something that I really questioned. And I think sometimes you try to tell stories that are very true to your life. So I think a lot of novelists, when they start out, I know my first attempt at a novel, I thought, I'm so interesting. My life is so interesting. The people in my life is so interesting. Why do I need to change anything? and you write things the way they are, but you realize that emotions and questions and journey that you want to take the reader on, it doesn't translate that way. Just because your life has this narrative as you're living it just doesn't make sense for the other person. So for me, I really need to create this fictional world to have the reader feel the things that I really felt.
If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. My guest today is Inci Atrek, and you're listening to Check This Out on New Hampshire Public Radio. We're talking about the new novel, Holiday Country. And right now we're talking to Inci a little bit about her writing life. And we're going to move into questions more specific to writing, physically writing. Can you tell us, we have a lot of listeners who are writers who love to peek into the life of writers. How do you write? Are you writing longhand? Give us the moment, the scene of how you write.
So I write in the mornings. If I'm drafting something, it's always in the mornings. I try to finish before noon. What I want to do that day, so it's a couple hours in the mornings. If I'm editing, if I'm happy with the plot and the characters, then that's just the best. I just take the printed pages and I go to a coffee shop, and I can spend a lot of longer hours editing. But for the writing, I find that's very draining after like 2 3 hours. It's not happening anymore. I write with coffee and usually two pieces of chocolate, and I write in Scrivener.
And do you have like a specific space where you write, or do you write anywhere?
I have an office in my apartment, so I write there, and it has all my bookshelves and some kind of artwork from friends to keep me inspired, because I like thinking about how, my friends created this art that surrounds me, and I'm also creating art for my friends to enjoy. And there's also a bookstore in my neighborhood that just opened with a really lovely cafe, so I've been starting to write there a little bit.
I love that. And how long did you work on this book, Holiday Country?
It depends on how you measure it. But from the moment I said, okay, I'm going to take my dream to be a novelist seriously, and I'm going to write a novel, and I'm not going to give up no matter what, that started in 2013. So it's been about 10 years. So I spent a few years writing my first attempt at a novel. It wasn't working out. I mean, my early readers gave me feedback that it wasn't working out. I got feedback from agents that it wasn't quite where it should be. And then I looked at it and I thought, okay, even if this storyline became the absolute best version of itself, this still isn't the story that I want to tell. So I took a year break where I did a master's program. I did an MBA, so very, very different from the writing life, complete break. And then when I came back to the manuscript, because I made two promises to myself when I first started. And I think those are really important. I said I would never give up no matter what. And then the second one was I won't be afraid of looking silly in front of people. So that means when you have a draft and you want to show it to someone, but you're scared of what they might think, you have to be okay with that. When someone asks you how your novel is going and you say, well, it's been 7 years and nothing yet, you have to be okay with that. And so I said I wasn't going to give up. So I graduated, I looked at the manuscript, and I thought, okay, is there anything that you had just a lot of fun writing? Like, was anything fun for you? Was anything great for you? And the book at that point took place all in Istanbul. And there was one small chapter that took place in Ayvalık. And I said, I love this one chapter about the summer town. So I'm going to write a novel that just takes place in the summer town. So I spent maybe 3 4 years on that. And that's what became Holiday Country.
Wow. So, how many pages do you think you wrote that were not published as a part of this book?
Oh my God. That I mean, I'm working on the second draft, or I'm working on a second novel now, and it's just been like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. Thousands? I don't know. I, I don't outline. So I
Wow.
think that for writers who don't outline, it's just you write book length manuscript after book length manuscript, and out the door they go. They're into the trash.
Is it painful for you to throw those pages out, or it's just part of the process?
No, it's not painful because I know they get me. Well, it's not painful now because I know that that is the process. But when you don't trust the process, it's painful because you stop yourself from writing badly when really all you need to do is write through all the bad stuff. I think you just really need to sit there and you need to write, and you just need to know I'm going to write 100 pages, and maybe on page 92, I'll be like, oh, there is the story.
Sometimes writers say that we always write the same story. We just put it in different settings. Do you feel that?
100%. I think that a lot of very similar themes are coming up, but just with completely different characters in different settings. And you think, oh God, I thought I had processed this already, but maybe not. Maybe some things are just meant to stay with you for life, and they just drive you to approach it from different angles.
Right. Let's go back to a little bit more of how you don't write with an outline. So if you don't write with an outline, how are you writing?
I think about usually everything comes from a place. I think, oh, I went to this place and it felt magical to me. What's a scene where I think I can capture that magic? And then I just start, writing a scene, or I have a situation that comes to mind and I write a situation. And when I'm starting out, it's all these chapters, all these different scenes about characters that they changed names throughout, they changed personalities throughout. But as you're writing, like if you write for a year and a half, kind of these scenes and these characters, you find that some scenes really pop out and they're incredibly strong. And some characters just like cement, and you think, like, oh, okay, this one girl has been with me for a year and a half. So I think she's important and we're going to stick with her. And this person kept changing and I couldn't get him right. So he's going to go out with the trash draft. And it's extremely inefficient. But it's the only way that I've managed to do things so far. So there we go.
Yeah, I mean, every writer has their own process, so that's why I find this fascinating to be able to ask you about it. Speaking of, I want to go back to you mentioned that you had taken this book out for, some responses earlier on. Could you tell us about the process of finding your agent and then selling the book? How did that go for you?
Oh, so my goal was to have 100 agent rejections before I had any sort of thought about where things were going or what was happening. And so I had, I think someone gave a talk once, maybe at my old workplace, about rejection based goal setting. And I thought that was so important because I think that with every rejection you get, you actually get a little bit closer to where you want to go. And so if my goal for myself was I need to get an agent, and then every time I didn't get one, I wouldn't be able to check anything off. And what I wanted to do was I wanted that sense of progress. And so when I had a goal of 100 rejections, every time I got a rejection in. So what I was doing was I was just looking at the backs of books that I liked, who the agents were. I was researching agency websites and kind of getting email addresses of agents who liked mother-daughter stories, liked multicultural stories, maybe had represented a book that took place in the Middle East before, books about kind of dual nationality and language. And yeah, every time I got a rejection, I knew, like, okay, I'm getting closer. I see my number getting closer to 100. And so there was one agent who, before I did my master, she was interested and she had asked for a revise and resubmit. And so I talked to her, and her vision to make the book stronger aligned with mine. So I spent about 3 months getting that ready for her. And I remember, actually, it was the night before an accounting exam. And I was studying and studying, and I received the pass email from her. And I thought, okay, we're taking a little break. And then I continued with my new book, and I started getting very different types of rejections. So rejections that were more personalized, more interested, and I knew I was getting closer with this manuscript. In the end, I got 2 offers, and I said yes to one.
Oh, I love that story. What advice do you have for new writers?
I mean, those 2 promises that I mentioned that I made to myself, no matter what, don't give up, and don't be afraid of looking a little silly when people react to your book or react to how long it's taking you to write your book. When you have those 2 goalposts and you're just looking ahead at the work that needs to be done, that's really important. But during that long time, you're becoming a better and better writer. You're becoming the writer that you want to be. So don't be afraid of how long it takes, and get lots of feedback and take that feedback seriously, even if it's hard to consider.
Inci Atrek, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure talking to you about your brand new novel, Holiday Country. I look forward to staying in touch and to reading more.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It was great to chat.
You've been listening to Check This Out, a new literary series, which is a partnership between New Hampshire Public Radio and the Howe Library in Hanover, New Hampshire. We dive deeply into the works of emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. Our producers today are Jared Jenish, Megan Coleman, and NHPR's Jessica Hunt. The Howe Library Director is Ruby Simon. NHPR's Program Director is Emily Quirk. The show was sponsored by the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation and the Howe Library Corporation. I'm Rachel Barenbaum, and we'll be back next week at the same time with more conversations. Remember to go to your local library and check out all the books you hear about here and love. See you next time. Thanks for listening.